Guys, I'm super happy about our next guest. I've been waiting to interview this guy, dreaming of talking to this guy since I was a medical student and maybe even a pre-med. He is the author of the legendary novel, The House of God. Anybody in healthcare who hasn't read this novel is an outlier and needs to go read it right away. It is the catch-22 of healthcare. It was a book that I read in my third year of residency that really validated the torturous experience of medical training, the hierarchical, painful, dehumanizing brutality of it all. And it made me feel like I wasn't alone, that it wasn't me that was crazy, it was the system that's crazy, which is exactly the sort of point of our whole movement. Why are they treating us like we're the ones, quote unquote, burning out in healthcare when we're trying to help our patients, we're trying to help each other? It's the system that's broken. And our guest is Dr. Stephen Bergman. So that's his real name, but the name that he goes by is his pen name, Samuel Shem. And that was the name that he wrote The House of God under, and they had trouble finding him because it was a fake name. And when they finally found him, they basically told him, man, you wrote a transformative novel. In this interview, Shem comes on the show to talk about his new book that's coming up. It's called Man's Fourth Best Hospital. It's going to be out November 12th. You can pre-order it on Amazon. You can go to his website, mansfourthbesthospital.com, where the word fourth is actually a number 4 and then TH. And I'll put it all in the links with ways you can pre-order the book. Now, I don't like to pitch books unless I've read them. And I read a pre-manuscript for this. And I'm telling you, in this one book, it's a sequel to The House of God. So the same characters come back, but he talks about everything that is broken in current healthcare and how we need to fight to make it better. And it's absolutely must reading for anyone who cares about Health 3.0. He actually describes a clinic in the novel that is Health 3.0, and I can't wait for you guys to read it. I'm going to be pushing it because I think it's like a handbook for how we can fight back, how we can resist, how we can do better. So Dr. Bergman is a professor of medical humanities at the New York University School of Medicine. He's teaching younglings about how to resist and fiction as resistance. And he actually, I think, teaches a course on the House of God. He joined me via Skype. So I apologize for some audio quality stuff. We don't have a good video of this, so this is going to be an audio only. If you want to subscribe, leave a review, that helps us a lot. If you want to become a supporter on Facebook, there are links to do that help support the show to make this kind of content possible. And without further ado, I will cut right into the interview. All right, guys, enjoy and share. Shem, it's really an honor and thrill to be with you today. This is a huge, I'm fangirling all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of you too, you know.
That is, if I could internally project the internal little scream that I'm making right now, it would be very loud and really disturbing, but also authentic. So, you know, I have obviously, and you hear this every single time that somebody interviews you, okay, House of God is a classic. It's the catch-22 of healthcare. It's the only paperback book that I still possess from my medical school days because I've decided to just kind of debride everything out. But that book that's dog-eared and covered in coffee is still there on my shelf. And I remember I chose consciously the time. And it's so funny, Shem, I'm sure everybody tells you, oh my gosh, this is how I experienced your book. And let me tell you what when I read it and what it did for me. So I got to get that out of the way so I can let you talk because I'm just gushing. I read it third year of residency, and I waited because people told me if you read it too soon, you'll freak out or you'll be disillusioned or you won't believe it. Read it at the right time. For me, the perfect time was third year because I read it as you intended it, which is fiction as resistance, as a satire, as a way to point out. And this is the thing, I expected, it's just going to be funny. And I was blown away by the deep statement you were making, which is medicine and its culture are broken. The way that we pursue not just training, but the way we care for our patients is sick fundamentally. It's disconnected. It's heartless. It lacks compassion. And I read all of that at a time when I needed to hear it, because it woke me up to say, you know what? I'm going to take a year off after residency. I'm going to pursue some other things. We've talked before, and I don't think I've told you this. I then took a year off and said, I need to recover my humanity. And then the draw and the lure of the beauty of medicine, the connection, the compassion, that component of it drew me back inexorably towards what I knew was my calling. But it took me stepping away to come back. So welcome to the show, Stephen Bergman, a.k.a. Samuel Shem.
Yeah, well, just to speak to that, I'm as amazed as anybody that almost 41 years later, this book, sells more and means more than ever. And, it was a remarkable process, because it was a very, I loved medicine, and we went into the Beth Israel Hospital as real idealists. We didn't take the black bags that the pharmaceutical companies offered us when we got there. We said, hell no, we're not going to do that kind of stuff. So we were real idealists, and it really was the classic thing of an unjust system hitting people who really wanted nothing but to deal with the human heart, really, and learn how to do medicine. And it had the weirdest start, which is after we finished. I got the guys together. I had started into my psych residency, but we got together and we drank and we smoked and we just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I just started typing it down. And
Wow.
I never wanted to write a novel. I had written plays and stuff. I wanted to be a writer more than a doctor, actually, but I'd never tried a novel. And, I just I wasn't very interested in it. And, but, I sort of typed out what we were doing. I have a tape of it, actually, in
Wow.
some things. And we just laughed. We sort of recovered, we were so traumatized that, I've got one long tape, probably hours, that I've listened to a little bit lately, that is full of just wit and laughter and all of the major characters. Chuck telling that story about, getting the postcards that got him out of Memphis. He was poor in Memphis. Want to be a college student at Oberlin, fill out and sign this card. And then with medical school, same thing. You want to go to Chicago Med, fill out and return this card. So I asked him on the tape, and what happened with the House of God? He said, same thing, man, same exact thing. Got a postcard, fill out, one thing led to another. I was looking for a play agent. I started my psychiatric residency. I was looking for a play agent, and the woman said, "Oh yeah, here's the name of somebody in New York." And so I wrote to her there, and at the bottom I said, "P.S. I've got a piece of a doctor novel." She wrote back and she said, I don't do fiction, but I don't do plays, but show me what you got. There's doctor novels. So what I had was, like you said, it was just, it had whiskey stains, coffee stains, tobacco burns, cigarettes. It was ridiculous. We were kind of profligate then. I sent it in. I forgot about it, and I was in my first year of psychiatric training at McLean Hospital, big Harvard psychiatric hospital. And about a week later, I was in the secretary's office, and the phone rang. She said, "Oh, here, it's for you." And it turned out I didn't even recognize her name, because I'd forgotten about it. And it was this agent, and this was going to be the big feedback from the world about what would be the House of God. She said, and the first words she said to me were, "I don't know if you're a madman or a genius, but I really like what you sent me." And I actually had the presence of mind to say, quote, I said, "Well, I can't help you there, but you should know I'm speaking to you from within a big mental institution at this time." That was the start. That was the start. But I don't know what to call you, Z or what?
Zubin, Z, whatever you know what? Sam Shem can call me anything he likes. You like Z? I like it too.
I like Shem. You like Z. Um, but Z, life is so chancy. It's this butterfly's wing that goes one way or the other. And um, I wanted to go to Mass General Hospital for my internship, and I had done very well in medical school. I got an A in medicine at Mass General, and the word was they'd take you if you got an A in medicine at Mass General. And I put the Beth Israel down, just because I had to stay in Boston to be with Janet. And I went to the interview at the Mass General, and it was a great interview. And I already had a PhD and stuff. I was a shoo-in. I opened up my thing on match day. It says Beth Israel. I said, "What do you mean, Beth Israel? I don't want to go to Beth Israel. I want to go to the Mass General. It's a great hospital." And and for years, I never found out why they didn't take me. Finally, one day I'm walking through Harvard Square, and the guy who was chief resident in the interview, and there were like six doctors interviewing you. I said, uh, whatever his name is, Joe or whatever. I said, "Joe, how come you didn't? I thought I thought that the interview went well." He said, "Yeah, it was great. It was a terrific interview." And I said, "Well, why didn't you take me?" He said, "Well, do you remember down at the bottom of the application for Mass General, there was anything else you want us to know?" And I said, "No, I don't remember that." He said, "Well, you put in, I've written 2 plays that have been produced." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We knew you weren't going to be a doctor. You wanted to be a writer. We weren't going to waste our time on you." I was probably
Oh,
the only person who got an A in medicine there they never took.
that,
And and the House of God, the Beth Israel, didn't require an interview. So, that's the way life is. If I hadn't written those 3 words, 2 plays produced, I would have gone to Mass General. And it's such a good hospital, I wouldn't have had the material to write the House of God. Never been a House of God, never been a novel. What I like to say is, it's like when I happened to get the Rhodes. If I hadn't gotten the Rhodes, I'd now be a divorced alcoholic neurosurgeon on the faculty at Harvard.
Oh, I know many of those.
Yeah, right.
that,
And I have, I am at this age, I am filled with gratitude. I mean, so many things when they could have gone one way or the other, they went the way that I could really, manage to go on through my life to do what I wanted to do.
You know what's interesting about that's an amazing story. I mean, what's interesting about it is that you created that path by putting down I produced 2 plays, by going and pursuing this, by in every unconscious and conscious way showing them, hey, no, this is who I am. Do you want this? Right. And it's interesting because I've done the same thing. I'm fairly, but not to the degree of success you've had. I'm fairly oppositional, and I'm always consciously or unconsciously telling people who I am, thinking they're just not going to like me and they're going to reject me. And now in my old age, I'm doing it and I'm like, I don't care what you think. At this point, this is who I am. And I was going to say, because House of God read as a piece of resistance fiction is that it's Samuel Shem standing up and saying, this was my experience. The world needs to know about this because it should not be this way. There's a world that should be and a world that really shouldn't be. And unfortunately, we're living in the one that shouldn't. And I think we can make it what it should be, which I thought was the hope, particularly at the end of that book.
Yeah, yeah. So much to talk about, but I never realized I was writing a fiction of resistance, which it is, and I'm very proud of it. And now I talk about that. I write as a resistor, and with Nance Forth is probably even a more desperate cause right now, a more important cause. It's sort of the climate disaster in medicine, and it actually affects medicine because your patients and your practices are in the hospital. I mean, the climate is in the hospital with all of us, all the different ways. But I um, I just remember all of this is in retrospect, and I've learned it over the years. I just remember a sense during the internship of what I call these, hey, wait a second moments, where you're doing something and you don't really think you should be doing it, or or you're walking past a guy on the street and you walk past and say, hey, wait a second, I should have given him $1. He didn't look that bad. And in the house of God, in Beth Israel, there were so many that it's like I hear voices.
I knew it, Shem.
I heard a voice in my ear that said, hey, wait a second. There's so much here that's not just. Somebody's got to write about it, and I guess it's up to me. And that's what I did. And it just kind of came out of my fingertips. It was just kind of joy. It was this. I don't think I've ever had as clear a chiseling of an experience. You know what I mean? And then when I created the Fat Man, there was no Fat Man. I was the Fat Man.
Yeah.
I acted that way. But the first law of the house of God is the Fat Man coming to me and saying, "Hey, write the Fat Man." And that all happened. And it had to be rewritten 7 times. I didn't know really how to write a novel, and as it went, when it came out, it was roundly. But here's something for aspiring writers. It had the worst publication any book ever had. The New York Times was on strike. It never got reviewed there. It never got reviewed anywhere. No publicity. I did not do any appearances for 2 years because I thought I was a purist. I thought real writers don't go out and tout their books. Let it go see what it's doing, go see what it's doing. And I went on writing. And then, and this was incredibly lucky too, one day I got a letter. Your audience may not know what a letter is. It's this thing in paper, it was in the old days. This would be, it came out in 78. So 1980, I got a letter. 2 years later, they couldn't find me. Nobody could find me. Nobody. And because I took a pen name too. And one day I got a letter and I opened it up, and the guy said, "I'm on call in a VA hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And if it weren't for your book, I'd kill myself."
Ooh.
That's what I said. I said, "Ooh."
Ooh.
And I woke up and I said, "Okay, maybe people want to hear what I have to say." And and from the first time I ever went out speaking to yesterday, I always talk about the same thing. It's gotten more crystallized, but it's first to this is the resistance part. First, to draw attention to injustice, and second, to write about the healing, the danger of isolation, and the healing power of good connection. And what's good connection? It's not hierarchical or racial difference stuff. It's mutual connection. If it ain't mutual, it ain't that good. And you've read some of the stuff, and that's carried me all the way through. It really has. I'm just so lucky. I can't believe it.
Oh, there's so much there, Shem. I'm in the presence of somebody who I feel, first of all, was an idol of mine, is an idol of mine, but also is on a on a path that I found myself stumbled upon, which is the communalization of pain path. This idea, you talk about mutual connection, and that person in Tulsa telling you, if I hadn't read your book, I would have killed myself. What did the book do? The book provided a connection where he was suffering alone, in isolation, apart, and we are meant to suffer together. If we're going to suffer, we need it witnessed, we need it shared, we need it understood, we need it acknowledged to some degree. And I think that's the healing gift also of medicine that has been sucked increasingly away in this RVU-based production, HCAPS, MACRA, MIPS, PQRS, MIL that we currently live in, the acronym soup. And you know what? And again, we're going to talk about Man's Fourth Best Hospital, which is your new book, which I read like in a marathon session and was screaming and highlighting pages and going, I'm stealing this for my talk. This is the distilled thing that I've been saying and that we're feeling on the front lines. And what's interesting to me is that you went from, you've had this long career, you've done all these things, you're at NYU, you're a professor, like basically this brilliant career, Rhodes Scholar, all this other stuff. And then you've written Man's Fourth Best Hospital, which is a distillation of all the lost connection, ultimately, all the lost connection that has happened in medicine, that has brought us to a place where 60% of doctors won't recommend this career to their kids, where we have epidemic suicide rates, where, however bad it was, Shem, when you were training, and that's when my parents trained too in the 70s, and they would tell stories, but the practice has gotten so much worse, as you know. And beautifully, when I read Man's Fourth, I didn't know what to expect. It wasn't clear what it was about until I read it, and I was like, oh man, this guy absolutely understands everything and has put it all in a book, every part of it, EHR, the disconnection of the radiologist who now sits in the dark by himself, clicking boxes. This poor radiologist, there was one chapter in the book, and I won't give away anything, but there's this poor radiologist who has to make these cover your ass sort of calls because he's isolated. The clinicians no longer come to talk to him. He has so much wisdom to bring, so much connection and love of what he does, but he's put in a basement and the residents are told, you don't go down there. He just reads these films and just check the dictation. And I started to tear up because this is what my wife says. She's a radiologist. Like, that's why she does it, is for these beautiful interactions where she can share wisdom with another human being.
Yeah. I'm so glad you like that because, I'll go back a bit. I was out of medicine remind me to get back to the radiologist. I might take a detour here, But I had always wanted to write a sequel to The House of God, but I was on the Harvard faculty for a lot of years writing other stuff, but I was out of medicine. I didn't see patients anymore, probably for the last 25 years or something like that. I was a psychiatrist, and I specialized in the end with treating people with substance abuse with the help of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. I mean, that's what the play we wrote, the off-Broadway play we wrote, Bill W. and Dr. Bob, which is about the founding of it's an amazing thing. And a doctor was one of the two. It had to be a doctor.
Shem, quick question about that. Was it true that psychedelics played a role in the founding of AA with one of the co-founders? I'd heard that. I don't know if it's apocryphal.
I think unless you call, what was it? Amyl nitrate, I think. I think he had been, Bill, when he was in a hospital in New York, Bill Wilson was treated with what they used in those days to deal with withdrawal. And he had some amyl nitrate, and maybe that made him have this vision. Who knows? But the interesting thing about this is Bill Wilson wound up in Akron, Ohio. He was a drunk stockbroker who was going to die. And he met Dr. Bob Smith, who was absolutely in the same horrible shape. And Bill said to him when they met, by chance, and had a meeting, he said, and my doctor told me that maybe this is a disease. And Bob, the doctor, reframes it. He says, a disease with signs and symptoms, a course and a progression, meaning what? A treatment? And he said, we got to find the treatment. And the treatment that they found was physical, psychological, and spiritual, not religious,
Spiritual.
The beginning of the holistic movement in 1935 in Akron. Anyway, I digress, but that's one of my real treasures that Janet and I wrote. So I wanted to write The House of God, but I wasn't in medicine. One day, 5 years ago, I got a call from NYU Medical School. And the guy said to me, "Hey, you want to be a professor in medicine at NYU Med?" I said, "What? Why? What do you want me to do? A professor in medical humanities?" And I said, "Yeah." "What do you want me to do?" And he said, "We want you to teach." I said, "What do you want me to teach?" And I said, and he said, "What, dummy? We want you to teach the House of God." And long story, so I needed some money too, and I joined them 5 years ago. And this is the best big medical organization I've ever been in. I don't play well in big structures, and this is 47,000 people, but it's incredible in its connectiveness. The first night I was down there, I'm curious. I explore. I spent a night in Bellevue emergency room, 900 bed hospital. Never turn a patient away. And at 3 a.m, the guy who's emptying all the trash cans in the emergency room, who's a Hispanic worker, he's not surly. He's not resentful. He's being treated well. He's talking to the nurses. Everybody's kind of. So I say to myself, why does this percolate all the way down? This sense of connection and hiring me of all people. Turns out the top three guys of this 47,000 strong institution were all refugees from the House of God.
Oh, wow. Really?
In my internship class, yeah. And they, this is the important thing. In general, this, that they were abused, like I was in the House of God. They were not going to continue the cycle of abuse. They were going to interrupt the cycle of abuse, and it works. And I must say, a disclaimer, man's fourth best hospital is not based on NYU because it's too good a hospital. But the first day that I went on ward rounds, I got so lucky. The first day I went on ward rounds with one of these three guys, it took me along. I saw the most incredible miracles that medicine can do now. What we could do. We couldn't do this stuff when I was there.
It was give them the Lasix and give them the steroids, right?
That's right, or both.
Right, or both.
So I saw brilliance and tremendous creation in terms of the science, in terms of what they could do surgically, all that stuff. Everybody knows that. But I immediately had this, hey, wait a second moment. I had not been in a hospital. I didn't know what was going on. I wasn't reading that much about it. So I see what's going on rounds. And boom, that was it. That was the start of the novel. Because as the narrator says at the beginning, Roy Bash, it's the same narrator, as he says at the beginning, he's looking back now. He says, I'm called to write this novel at a time when medicine could go one of either two ways, either toward more humane treatment or toward money and screens, and then he says, which is money and money, right? Because it's a cash.
Oh.
As you say, all this. One of the things so I said, hey, wait a second, somebody's got to write this novel. I guess it's up to me. And I started writing, and it was, I had to learn more, but it was kind of like the House of God, even though it was harder because I'm older. But to bring these guys back, to bring the fat man back, I mean, how good is that?
Dude. So this is the thing, all right? So I started reading it. The Fat Man's back, Roy's back, Eat My Dust Eddie's back, Hooper's back, Barry, Chuck. It's absurd, the rush of like nostalgia but now they are back, as the kids say, in a woke book. So this book is woke. And by woke, what I mean is everything you just said about connection, not playing well in large organizations, guilty of that. But when you see connection filtered down, and everybody start to connect, then you start to see that even large organizations can be about us we instead of I and me. And when you start to see that in service of a higher purpose of what you're doing, it's very similar to AA. It doesn't even have to be about God. It's about a higher purpose, a connection. And so seeing this book now where these sort of, this cast of characters who we knew and loved from House of God are now coming back, and they're tasked with nothing less than bringing humanity back to medicine. And, now the truth is there's a contrived aspect to that, right? So like these guys get to have a clinic that Fat Man gets to run. And so you have to create a situation that's a little bit unrealistic. Or is it, Shem? Because my whole story was I was plucked from Stanford after making videos as my way of using video as resistance by the CEO of Zappos, the online shoe company, to try to do something to transform medicine. And he said, build a clinic that you think shows the world what it could look like. And then I read your book, and it's the plot is the same. And listen, we've not met, we've not talked prior to after you writing the book. And I was like, how does this come out of Sam Shem's mind? And then I read it and I was like, this clinic is Turntable Health. And one of the most magical things that happened in this clinic was they somehow, I won't give away too much, but let's just say the EHR, or should I say the electronic cash register, stops working in this clinic, and they have to go to read only so they can get data out of the system to take care of human beings, but they don't have to be data entry clerks or checkout clerks at a supermarket. So they get to spend time with patients. They connect. They go from I and me to us and we, and and you see it unfold in the book. In so many ways, they address every single thing that's gone haywire. And when I read it, I was like, there were times, Shem, honestly, when I wanted to email you. You were in Costa Rica. I couldn't reach you. And in the process of reading it, there were so many times when I was like, if I could call him right now, he would hear me actually emotional about this particular chapter or deeply connected to this chapter. And because it tells this story with a hopeful, here's a bright spot, here's what it could look like, here's what we could do, instead of reducing it to money and clicks and screens, which is what it is being reduced to if we don't fight back.
Yeah. Well, I read about, I'm sorry, what was the name of your thing in Song?
We called it Turntable Health because we believed, that analog heart of medicine, it's like a vinyl record. It's beautiful and imperfect, and it's got clicks and pops and hums just like a human. And you can amplify it digitally, but it's an analog thing. So yes, Turntable Health.
Yeah. I, as I say, I just jumped in, and this is different from the House of God because I didn't go through this. I went through the House of God. This was a creation, imagination, and I just, how you just jump into things. You can't. I got up early. I wrote for 4 hours. I took a nap. Blah blah blah. Walked and worked in the afternoon, and I just was possessed. Well, it all fit together. I mean, how the Fat Man would be asked because he's such an accomplished. He's in Silicon Valley now, trying to in final trials for a pill that will help Gomers to remember. And they call him in to do this, and I created this clinic, and I created most of the patients, and it actually, a little different from the House of God. It has a kind of a plot. It has kind of a story, but I was just what really, really all of this rode on and kept me going and really made me want to do it right was the feeling of injustice, as I said, that that when I realized what this is about, and then I saw all the quote burnout or moral problem in like a war stuff. When I saw all of this stuff, I said, this can be even more powerful, or in a different way, or for a wider audience, than the house of God, because the house of God was mainly for, us docs. It was about the brutality of medical training. This one is not just about doctors. It's about doctors now, for sure. They're front and center. And every doctor who's read this or talked to me about it, they absolutely identify with it like you do, because nobody's quite told it like that. The thing that I've learned, you can have 100 papers about what's going on in doctors' lives now, but it's not like one novel that hits you in the heart and it hits you in the gut. And you never forget what hits you in the gut and the heart. And, why are we talking about House of God? It's still current. And this book, I'll just finish this little part of it. This book is for doctors and patients. Patients don't know why our backs are turned to them and looking into the screen. I asked 100 of them, maybe. It's so they can get my words right and all that stuff, Doctors and patients and other healthcare workers, let's not forget that, especially nurses. I'm scheduled to write an op-ed piece for the New York Times, but I said I wanted to do it with this nurse, the two of us working together. Her name is Teresa Brown, who wrote 5 Patients, who gave a terrific blurb for Man's Force. She starts out with, "Oh my God," that's a good blurb. But working with nurses, what we have to do. So that might be the first op-ed piece in the New York Times by a doctor and a nurse. You never hear about that.
Amazing.
What we have to do, Z, if this is going to have any real effect, is we have to make alliances with those people, with patients, with other healthcare workers and nurses, and maybe even hospitals. That's where I'm hoping this will lead, that we will, because doctors, we never get together. In the history of American medicine, no doctors have ever gotten together.
Oh man, it's amazing. I'm at a loss because there's so much in what you said that I want to address. It's almost like a 3-hour podcast if I went through every single thing, because it's yeah, exactly. It's like you got in my head and kind of are you know what? And we need that. So okay, just even from the beginning here. So first of all, doctors and nurses together are dangerously powerful. And we have ignored this alliance. It's a natural alliance. It's been turned into enmity. It's been turned into each of us staring at a screen instead of talking to each other. It's been turned into, why are you calling me at 2 a.m? It should be, we are natural allies in this battle to care for patients and take it back from these forces. Now, you mentioned hospitals. Hospitals are not the enemy. They're doing what they're incentivized to do. The incentives are the enemy. The structure is the enemy. The path that our elephant and rider are walking on is the enemy, and we need to reshape that, which you do talk about. And there's a million ways to do that, but the point is it needs to be done. The third thing is, when you told this story, I can tell as frontline physician that there are elements sometimes where, is he being a little naive, or is there something where maybe it's because he's not in the clinic every day? And then I came to a realization, that's exactly what we need. Because if a full-time in the trenches doctor tried to write this book, it would be full of bias, it would be full of conditioning, it would be full of, the EHR is not that bad, we really need it for this and this. And you know what, the fee-for-service incentives aren't a terrible thing. And as Upton Sinclair said, you cannot teach a man new truths if his salary depends on him not understanding them. And I think being out of that matrix is very, very key. And it's definitely benefited me. Now I'm at a point where I will say anything I believe without fear of losing my job. I don't care about sponsors. I don't care about speaking gigs. If it doesn't, I have to live with myself. I have to hope that there's a world where my kids are actually going to fit into this system, whether they're receiving care or delivering care, if that's what they choose to do. And that's the calling. And I felt that in your book. It's infused with this higher sort of purpose to save medicine, and we have to do it together. That's the key thing. The us and we is the key thing. And there's like a undercurrent of kind of Buddhist thought, and there's an undercurrent of counterculture, and there's an undercurrent of academics. And the thing is, no one can come at you, Shem, and be like, well, this guy doesn't get it. Dude, you wrote the House of effing God. Like, there is no one on earth who gets it more than Sam Shem. And with that credibility now, you can wield it as a weapon to actually help fight this battle. So that's what I wanted to say about the book before I forget, because it was so, again, powerful in that sense coming from you. And it really, you researched it. I mean, you know exactly. There were things in there where I was like, how come I should be talking about this? This is something I know to be true. How come I'm not railing about, the isolation of the radiologist? They tell me this. Why is this not on the top of my agenda? Resistance, right? I did a show where I talked about having just read the book, and I was like, how come we're not resisting? How come we're not standing up and speaking together? You said something amazing in your Annals of Internal Medicine article where you said, in hierarchical organizations, oh man, by the way, you and I share this, it's not a hatred, it's a burning hatred of large hierarchical organizations and our place in them, just being silenced. And this idea that in those organizations, if you speak up, you are beaten down. If we speak up, everybody in that org at whatever level, then they have to listen. Then it becomes an existential crisis for the organization. And you said doctors never get together. This is why we're so autonomous, and we're conditioned to be cowboys, and we're also conditioned to accept the system as it is and not change it. I mean, medical school was a conditioning experience. 2 years of memorized facts passed on from on high by a sage on a stage. 50% of them will be proven untrue. They don't have the courtesy to tell you which 50%. And then the second 2 years, it's about fealty to authority, kissing the ring of the attending physician. The goal being one day you'll be the ring that's kissed. So this is a perfect crucible for innovative thinking, for out of the box, for challenging the system. The opposite. We're conditioned to behave, to sit down like elephants in a circus. You put a rope on us and we sit down and shut up. And what your book says is even those people who've been through the crucible, all your characters in House of God, can actually wake up when they see a beautiful thing and go, this is how it should be done. And once you've taken that red pill and seen the matrix for what it is, you cannot go back into the matrix and work there. You have to build something better. And we failed, and it was in Las Vegas, and we had to close because our big insurance partner went out of business, and it was in the end about money, about no one is willing to pay to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah, it's just such a pleasure. We're really on the same page, only I'm older.
You're better. That's
well, there is such a thing, that I've been around corners that you haven't. I mean, a lot of them you have, but I've been around those corners a little further on, and I don't know exactly where to go with this. There's so much. Let me just. There's one part of the book that really gave me a little trouble writing.
Oh, please.
It's not what you think. The fat man, as you said, his goal is to put the human back in medicine. And, it's not an easy ride. It's a rough ride, of course, in this big institution. But in the middle of the book or so, I realized, look, I can't just blow hot air. I can't describe things. I've got to have something that guys like you and me and other doctors haven't put together that maybe I can put together. And you know what it is? I would love if this gets used somehow in the lingo. And that is, the fat man says, I'm giving you a lecture, I think it actually is on a very cold winter day when Roy walks out of his house to go to the hospital. And he says, it was so cold that my neighbor, the hedge fund guy, had his hands in his own pockets. And that's a good prelude to what the fat man was going to say. So he's a high-tech guy. He's fat, he's very rich from high-tech, from the pill. And he does a talk on blackboard with chalk,
Yeah.
which I love. And what he does, he says, okay, and he writes on the top of the board, you probably remember this, the 6 rackets of American healthcare, :
Yep.
follow the money, and then below, and how to resist it, right? And I felt I had a responsibility. I'm not an economist. I'm not but it took me about 2 months to figure out how these 6 different rackets are all intertwined in this system. They're going all the way from the electronic medical record to hedge funds. Hedge funds are buying up skin practices. So did you know that?
I did, and they're buying up those, and they're buying up air ambulances, and they're buying up things that people need when they're vulnerable beyond skin. It is sickening. Yeah.
I think they can bet either way on the skin. If it fails, they make money. If it succeeds, they make money. That's their juice. Anyway, so I felt it took me a long while to do this, and I think it's kind of a roadmap. I really do. I mean, it's a Fat Man, so it's funny. It's said in a way that I hope that worked for you.
It really did. And the thing is, and this is a point I want to make, because some people will read this book either having not read House of God or not understanding that it is satirical to the extent that you don't take it literally. You don't imagine like the Fat Man standing there and lecturing this. You imagine it, but it's not really literally what you're trying to say. He is a hyperbolized, amazing symbol of what is right. And even he struggles in the book. The legendary Fat Man has struggles, and it's heartbreaking to see, because you go, oh my gosh, he was the perfect vision of what a doctor should be in House of God. He was the anchor, that sort of moral go-to, and now he can be defeated or struggle in this cash mill, this assembly line where we're commoditized.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, I can't say I decided it. He decided it, and I wrote it. But in the House of God, he was the best. He was what should have been or could have been the best of me. I mean, that's how I wrote him. I wasn't like that. I was just, I was like Roy, and the Fat Man was a part that I couldn't be at that time. But in the House of God, nothing was ever really wrong with him, except that he was fat. I mean, nothing happened to him, right?
Right.
He was, and I realized, it's several years later now, and I realized, he's more of a person than I made him at that point, and he's older, and so he has flaws, but they're flaws that make him even more of who he is, really. And of course, Barry, one of the other characters, she also takes a much more active part in this book. And she comes in and basically challenges him. I'm not spoiling anything. She kind of challenges him and all the other guys. And actually, there are a lot of women. I got to parity in women in this book. There are a number of women and men who are main characters now, in a way. But she challenges him to say, well, for instance, how do you lead? You're a great leader. How do you lead? And he just says, well, I show them how to do it and all that stuff. And what she inserts into the conversation, he says, is that this is it's a traditional I who has the authority leader in this system. And what she says is what you were saying, and we both understand, that the way to do it is to find the we. You find all the different we's, and you use the word we. And the psychological thinking behind that is what Janet and I actually did earlier on when we were working together. And that is...
Janet is your wife?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
She put a whole new theory out there. We created this, that usually the theories of psychological health are measured in a self. All of it in the self. The psychological health and growth is in the self, like doctors. As I was saying before, they don't get together, What she said, the women said, this doesn't talk to us. She said, there's a relational model, different from a self model, where the measure of a person's psychological health and growth is in the quality of their connections, the quality of their relationships, their we's that they construct. And that, plus a Buddhist practice, changed my life. All of a sudden, and I recommend this, I started to almost visualize the we in interactions. Once you get to the we, you use that word, you can then talk about the qualities of the we, like empathy or like joy or like, whatever. That goes way out on the other side.
Actually, Shem, that's like a current fascination of mine, is this whole thing, this idea of selflessness, self as a construction that can harm us, but we as something that transcends that. And it's interesting, even coming back to like getting very meta. So we're doing this interview over Skype, and initially I killed my video because I wanted to make sure I had enough bandwidth so that our audio was good. But then I asked you early on in the beginning of the interview, so Shem, like, how do you want to do this? Do you want to like see each other while we're talking, even though this is going to be audio only? Because I think the video will look weird in the split screen. It's not something my audience likes. And you said, I like to see people when I talk to them. And I said, okay, well, I'm actually very self-conscious, and I actually like to pace around when I talk, and I kind of pick at my head, and I have these little mannerisms like Bill Gates rocking back and forth. And but I said, okay, I'm going to try this. And being able to see you as I talk to you has created this kind of we space where now I feel much more connected. And so I have to hand it to you. You're onto something there that I've learned from even in this.
Yeah. So I don't know where we go. I think I'm glad I am glad that this book is coming out now, because I think it's just right. I think the timing is just right. I think people are going to respond to it. And I'm trying to say to people, I talk to a lot of younger people, and I'm trying to say, the reason that I can do this, and I don't run on fear, I run on guilt.
You're Jewish boy.
Yeah. But I say to them, I and my generation were brought up in the 60s. And so from the first day of college, we learned that if you get together around an issue and you don't quit, you keep at it, you can actually bring change. The resistance can bring change. And the reason that this shaped me, you don't know the whole historical forces that are shaping you when you're going through them. Later, you look back. Later, I look back and I said, Jesus, the reason I resisted in the house of God was I was part of the resistance in the 60s that we saw something happen. We put the civil rights laws on the books, and we ended the Vietnam War. So that's in me. I don't have a real depressive or doubting part of my actions in medicine. I really don't. I really think if we have the power to change medicine. We really do. I don't doubt that. And what's going to happen in the next 5 years? There's going to be some kind of single payer it gets passed, probably because of the women and stuff. And I say that to doctors, say, oh, I can't live on Medicare wages, right? And hospitals say, well, I can't afford it. Right. That thing that looks like a danger to you or a threat is an opportunity. It's then when we get together, and we say, okay, yeah, we'll have some kind of national health care thing with, of course, a supplemental private insurance like all the other, nations. You can still have private insurance in this system, but, people want to buy it. But we doctors have to get together and say at that point, no, we can't work for that. And if you insist, we're not going to go to work. And, that's the answer is nurses never lose a strike. They got a union. They're out now. They never lose a strike. We never had a union. I mean, I'm not saying necessarily we have a union, but we have to have a movement that sticks together on a basic thing, which will be, guess what, Z? Money. No, but none of us will. Well, I'm not in it yet, but we can't. It's right to say that we can't live in this current system with this payment. Now, if things change a little bit more, like, NYU has free tuition so that it doesn't cost you anything to go to medical school, you have no debt and whatever, then maybe, our living standard can go down a little bit. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, I'm saying to and the current generation of students, as you said earlier, they don't have this experience. I hate to say it, but they have not very often, some are not like, very often they have not moved across the line, as you said. They've crossed the lines because they haven't had that experience. And what and also you in a few years too, I can't do all this. I'm handing it off. I'm trying to say to people, we're handing it to you. This is your job now. You've got to, I'll help, I'll get out on the front lines and all that stuff. But somehow we have to do something. And the best thing that I would like about this, the same way that the House of God did result in some changes in the brutality of medicine. If this could be taken up by doctors and patients and nurses and stuff. That sound crazy?
It's my kind of crazy, Shem. You're speaking my language. So there's so much there, as everything you say is just laden with so many things to discuss. And that particular, so whether we're talking about universal coverage, which I support, but it has to be in a way that we are paid well to do good for patients, which means we have to modify the care delivery model. We have to focus on prevention. We have to deal with this med school tuition nonsense. We have to incentivize people to go into things like primary care and specialize if that's their calling. We need to do all these things. And who is going to lead it? Right now, we're letting people lead it who have never touched a patient. And I think that's the problem. And you said, nurses have unions, doctors don't have unions. What if we had a virtual union of every healthcare practitioner and activist patient in the country? And I don't know, what if they were like 2 to 12 million strong and they called themselves the Z-Pack, like my audience, and we're already 2 million strong. And if you take a book like Man's Fourth Best Hospital, and I tell the Z-Pack, listen, you guys, you may not agree with everything in the book. It may not be your style of fiction, but if you read it, you will come away armed with the deepest understanding of what is broken and potentially ways how to fix it. Now, we all know we're looking for a common goal. I kind of all feel that. We all have different ways to get there. We don't have to have the same way. All healthcare is local. That's fine. But if we have this vision, collectively, we can do something that they learned to do in the 60s in your generation, which is actually affect transformative change at a universal level. And you're absolutely right. I think this current, especially iGen, the youngest generation born after 97, they've been overparented, overprotected, treated like fragile entities. And what they are is anti-fragile. They get stronger from adversity and resilience within limits. And if they all stood up together with our millennials and our boomers and our Gen Xers, which I am, and we stood up and said, you know what, this is not the healthcare system our country deserved. We've gone to war for less than our own healthcare system has done to us. And those examples are in your book. I mean, there's so, oh my God, Shem, the woman with the gallbladder from Africa. I mean, the stories in this book are heartbreaking because we've all seen them. And absolutely. And so I just want to say, like, again, people have to read this. They have to share this. They have to become part of a movement. We have to lead it as clinicians, as frontline healthcare people, as administrators, as hospital executives, all together, or it's going to be a disaster. And then the AI will just replace us and we'll all be plugged back into the matrix.
Yeah. I've been thinking, I had the thought the other day, I gave a talk on Man's Fourth and read from Man's Fourth a bit. And somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "We doctors can't form a union. It's against the law." And there is I remember hearing that before. There is something that does say somewhere in the federal code or something that doctors can't strike, can't go on strike. And this is what I'm trying to do in my daylight hours. How does this kind of get done? We don't have to join a union. I loved what you said. We have a group. There's group. We have a we doctors. That's a great name. We doctors. We doctors and other healthcare. We doctors. We're not going on strike. And I had this idea, believe it or not, about 20 years ago, I wrote an op-ed piece for the Boston Globe called "The Doctor Strike." 20 years ago, when managed care came into. I'll tell you the story quickly. Managed care came into Massachusetts really hard. I think it was in the 80s. I was in practice. And what they did was Nazi. Really, it was a Nazi technique where, if you don't give me 3, I'll kill 100 or something like that. They said they bombarded Massachusetts doctors with, if you don't sign up with us, you're not going to have any patients. So the doctors had a choice: join or not, or organize. And what did they do? They elbowed each other out of the way to get into the managed care systems. And that was the start of it. They never got together.
That doesn't surprise me at all. We have always been, Shem, our worst enemy. I remember back to medical school at UCSF, we were pass-fail the first 2 years. Now that creates an interesting we space, because it's like, okay, look, all these cream of the crop kids coming in, UCSF, everybody's pretty competitive. They beat all these kids, these pre-meds, to get into this very competitive school. This is ingrained in their conditioning. And then you try to unwind it over 2 years of pass-fail, just P equals MD. Pass the test, don't stress out. People still stressed, but it was okay. What happened third year? They did an interesting psychological twist, kind of like the Stanford prison experiment or something terrific like that. They said, let's add back in the effect of putting grades back during the clinical rotation. So pass, fail, honors. So really, now you have F, C, and A. That's basically what the grades were. So now you see what ends up happening, emerging with people who want to compete for that ortho residency or that radiology residency or that derm residency at the top institutions. Suddenly the personality clicks. They're no longer working with their colleagues, helping them learn. They're gunning out, seeing each other's patients, presenting them, oh, well, you know what I read about your patient, and just stabbing each other square in the back. And I saw it constantly. Nurses say the same thing, that they eat their young, that these kind of things happen. There's something about the way we select and train and condition our young people that they behave this way. And then it follows us, unsurprisingly, into medicine. And now we cannot work together. But I'll tell you, though, I'm actually hopeful, because you've spoken for large audiences. I've spoken for large audiences. When you have like 1,000 docs sitting there and you can get them all focused and all feeling the same 60 hertz refresh rate of your mental cycle, talking about what medicine could be and seeing those cycles synchronize and everybody feeling the same thing for that moment, like we can do this, there's hope. But it takes people like you to write a book like this, to galvanize people and go, we have this common thing that we ought to be working together.
Yeah. We are brothers in this, or maybe I'm a little father-son in this, because we are from a different generation, and that's nice. That's nice.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is beautiful, and neither of us have any hair, too. So that's not so beautiful, but. Yeah, this is, I hope this book is hopeful. I mean, it's sad in a lot of ways. It deals with, in some ways, my being older, and as you know, there's in the first chapters, there's this Roy Bash takes a terrible fall off a mountain in Costa Rica. And that actually was one of the, I knew I wanted to start the book there because that happened to me. I mean, if I had been, this is that flicker of the wind, if I had fallen, another 6 inches, I'd be dead because I'd opened my eyes and there was the boulder.
Mm.
And that was very important. And so this book is from a different standpoint. But I've always felt that in order to get people to listen, this was the other thing that came into my mind with the House of God, a profound voice in my head that said, this is so bad, this was so bad, the only way people will read it is if it rides on humor. Humor. I had never thought of writing humor before, but I realized this, and the first part of the book is very, very funny, and then it gets darker and darker, and that's when people who try to read it during the internship put it down. They don't want to go on, And you know what? 40 years later, Z, when I'm teaching this in a 25-person seminar, mostly people, first and second year students, some doctors, etc. I mean, there are 6 sessions. We just read the book and talk about it. They can't use, I don't let them use their computers or phones, and it's an hour and a half per session. These are new students, new freshmen, they're like 23 years old. You can hear a pin drop. Nobody stirs. The book, whatever is in it, it's there. I guess what I'm trying to say, it's there as a yearning for this current generation to try to address this. But they don't know how or what, or they don't want to risk something. I think I'll end on I think I'm getting a little tired, so I'll end on a hopeful note, which I think I'm an optimist. I mean, you can't, and as it says, there's a line in the book where at one point the narrator says, "I plead sanity." You may remember there's that line in it.
Yeah.
But because of what I grew up with, and at that time, mind you, Vietnam and the race situation was really, I mean, you didn't experience it. The cities were in flames. They were being looted. There were huge, Kent State, when the Ohio State National Guard fired on and killed 3 students out of just cold blood because of the Nixon bombing of Cambodia was revealed. I mean, they haven't really lived through this, the current generation, for several generations. And I hope that people my age and all the way down through yours, since you're on the beam too, can be guides to them. Like, it's okay, in a group, you will have power. Nobody is going to pick you off. You don't, I mean, I do believe, this is the hopeful part. I really do believe that this is coming to a very nice crisis in medicine. I think it's coming, it's the Trump impeachment day, so it's coming there too, which is remarkable and wonderful. But we're coming to a very nice crisis in medicine where, it's out of suffering, as we talked about. Out of suffering comes understanding and action, as long as you don't suffer yourself. You gotta ask for help. You suffer with others, and that's strength. And I believe that to my core. And I'm very optimistic with guys like you and other people. We have to help these younger ones, because one of the things I sort of challenged somebody, or I asked, I didn't challenge. And then, in the seminar at NYU one year, I've been doing it for 5 years. I said, well, it's all pass fail in the first 2 years, right? Because they were skipping this to go to do some of their little tests. They had to take tests along the way. I said, but you never fail, right? I mean, if you know a fair amount. No. Well, why are you working so hard. You know, they've had to work so hard to get into medical school. They really keep going, working hard, you know? And we have to have we have to be competent or nobody's going to listen to us. And you and I are quite competent. But I feel we're edging toward a turning point. And I'm very optimistic. I really am. And you know, anything we can do together, let's do together around the book or whatever.
I'm absolutely inspired by you, Shem. I mean, it is a beautiful thing when the lessons of one generation inform and provide lessons for another generation, sharing a common thread, which is this love of caring for other human beings. And I want to leave us with some really inspiring call to action that you put in your Annals article, which I linked to in the rant that I did, which is the 4 things you need to do to resist. And I think they were on point. And you nailed some of them just now. One of them is become competent at your stuff. So really know your craft. And it doesn't mean killing yourself learning. It doesn't mean killing yourself working. It means learn it so that you can do it in your sleep, so that you're a really good doctor or nurse or respiratory therapist or dietitian or janitor or environmental services engineer. Whatever it is you do, care about it. Have it be your calling, right? I think the second thing you said is that, let me see because you had 4 and the last one was selflessness. The second one, connection. So in other words, isolation is the enemy. That was the second one. And this idea that we've talked about this, it's a theme of this whole podcast, is us in isolation equals suffering, equals failure, equals being picked off. And when we're together, we go from I and me to us and we can actually transform the system, knowing that we share a common goal, even if we have different ways of getting there. And the third one was to speak up. And that's what you're doing with this book. That's what I try to do with my show. That's why everybody in the Z-Pack and beyond should read Man's Fourth Best Hospital 1,000%, because it is our way. All we have to do is put the book on the desk of someone we care about and go, this is me speaking up. I feel this way. This is the struggle and the hope, and this is what we ought to be talking about. And we can join this social media tribe, or we can go to groups. We can meet with each other. We can have power. We can change this before someone changes us for us, and it's a mess. And speaking up together means we have a voice. Speaking up alone in a hierarchical organization means you get beaten down. So I think those 4 sort of calls to, and that selflessness, losing the self-centeredness as the last thing to end our podcast, I think this idea that we can transcend this limited sense of who we are and understand that we're both an autonomous thing and connected deeply to everything around us. And losing that sense of separateness allows us to feel love in the face of suffering and connection, and it allows us to open up and share our own suffering. And that sounds all very spooky and new agey, but everyone knows it's just true. When you search inside, that's what it is. So
people have to go from kind of, the vision that's in my mind is that they're kind of hunched over, with this burden on their back. You know what I mean? They're kind of burdened. And we, you, me, and tons of other people are trying to help them find a way toward standing up and being free for exactly what you said, for caring for patients. That's it. And yourself and oneself.
And each other as caregivers.
Absolutely.
That's right. So I'm optimistic, and we'll keep on.
Shem, I want you to make me a promise here in front of all these people. I want you to be my friend and work with me on this stuff, because I need your help. It's a tribe that really is looking for connection and leadership and purpose, and I think what you've done with this book is so tremendous. It's an honor to have you here and be able to spread in whatever little way I can what you're doing. And thanks again.
I sound like Mr. Roberts. I'll be your friend if you're my friend.
And there we've gone from I and me to us and we at the end of the show. All right. Dr.
Touch.
Really, absolutely. Dr. Stephen Bergman, a.k.a. Sam Shem, thanks for being on the show, and we out. Peace.
Okay. Bye-bye.